Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Zambia in Focus. And I am your host, Abel Chanda, focusing today on the PF's 2021 through to 2026 manifesto. The Patriotic Front came into power in 2011 and have since overseen many structural and policy changes in the 9 years or so that they have been in power. For the year 2021, they seek another 5-year mandate from the electorate for them to continue these policies and perhaps extend them even further. It is obvious that over the 9 years, they have invested heavily in infrastructure development, which obviously we see in the many roads and hospitals and schools that they have built, and also the paving of thousands of pathways as well, thousands of kilometers of pathways as well. They also notably increased the threshold of the tax-free bracket from 1,000 kwacha to about 4,100 kwacha or 4,000 kwacha, I believe, sometime last year. What do they intend to do should they be re-elected? And what policies do they intend to implement should they be given another term? Today, we want to review the manifesto that they released for the 2021-2026 period and the mandate that they intend to implement and the economic policies that they effect. Just like the previous video, we will focus on 5 major macroeconomic variables, being GDP, inflation, the exchange rate, net exports, and of course, unemployment. And we'll focus, of course, on the same key areas as we did before, being energy, mining, debt management, and the structuring of it and how to improve it, as well as agriculture. And of course, how they intend to realign their spending policies as well. As I had mentioned again in the previous video, our debt stock currently sits at around 19.3 billion United States dollars. As such, a managing and restructuring of this debt should be a major macroeconomic policy issue. Now, firstly, let me begin by a commendation of the protective policies that the PF have outlined in their manifesto. What are these protective policies that I'm talking about? They intend to compel supermarkets to only get locally produced crops. What that means is if there is a certain crop that is found locally in Zambia, it should not be imported by that supermarket, but should be bought from local producers. And this, of course, will improve our productive capacity, will improve our gross domestic product as well, and of course, improve the livelihood of the people in Zambia. Also, they intend to introduce protective policies in gold mining, timber processing as well, so that only Zambians should engage in those areas. So that's a lot of commendation that I want to give. This, coupled with proper credit access, could significantly improve the movement and the motion of our country in those areas, and especially empower our Zambian people. Now, of course, we want to talk about how these policies are going to improve certain fundamental variables and how those policies could likely be implemented to improve them. Beginning with mining, they intend to establish a mines regulatory authority, which of course is a forward movement in enhancing better controls, measures, and accountability. Why is that? Because transfer pricing remains a major concern and a major problem for our country. What is transfer pricing? Well, mines have been known to declare sales of their copper estimates much lower than they are actually selling them for. This is done through an elaborate network of escrow companies and small holding companies that they actually own and sell. It's a complicated network, and transfer pricing remains a major problem. The National Resource Governance Institute, did a study in 2016 on the Zambian mining sector and estimated that Zambia loses close to 500 million United States dollars every year to transfer pricing. So it is a forward movement that they intend to implement a mines regulatory authority with the view to reducing transfer pricing. What would this do for us should it be rightly implemented? Well, it will increase the treasury funding, because that $500 million we're losing is now going into the government treasury. We expect an increase in our exchange rate, because now a greater value of exports is now being declared, and this of course will reduce the overall cost of living. Of course, with an increase in how much of our funds are available to the government treasury, we also expect a dismantling of our local debt stock, which sits at around $7.3 billion for our local suppliers and investors as well. So this Zambia-centric mining and farming diversification policy is one that promises to add a lot of value should it be rightly implemented as well. Concerning energy, I would like to point out that in the 9 years that the PF have been in power, they have reduced actually our power deficit and have almost doubled how much power we're generating. When the PF came into power in 2011, our country's power generation capacity was at about 1,200 megawatts as compared to the 2,800 megawatts that we see today. They also intend to oversee the commissioning and establishment of the Kafue Gorge Lower, which should add 750 megawatts to our national grid and significantly reduce our load shedding plight. They also intend to upgrade the Lusiwasi power station from 12 megawatts to 86 megawatts. And if all of these aspects are rightly implemented, then we expect to see a lot of movement. In what sense? Well, we expect to see exports increase because overall productivity has increased. And with an increase in overall productivity and exports, we expect to see, of course, an improved exchange rate and lower cost of living. I must mention, of course, that I had a strong criticism of this mining policy because it mentions nothing concerning the PPPs. I believe PPPs, or public-private partnerships, should be an important and fundamental aspect of our mining policy structure, so as to ensure that Zambians at all times benefit from the arrangements, because PPPs allow for countries to remain the owners of those mines, of those institutions, once the PPP agreement reaches its maturity or its close. Otherwise, a very strong mining policy. Concerning tax, my major concern is that they intend to consolidate the deductions on individual pay slips. Though, of course, I did not fully understand what was being said, but this is what I got from it. On your pay slip, you have a number of deductions. Some of those include your payee, your national health insurance, and your NAPSA, and others as well. And from what I am gathering here, when they say they intend to consolidate these deductions, instead of seeing NAPSA, payee, NEMA as individual deductions, you might see just one block figure being deducted from your account. I do not think this is a good policy, and I'll mention why. Because I would like to know how much is going to NAPSA. I would like to know how much is going to NEMA. I'd like to know how much I'm paying as tax. Of course, I may have read this wrongly, but this is my understanding of what they mean when they say they intend to consolidate all of these deductions into one major deduction. So it would be nice to perhaps gain clarity. If it is as I have explained it, then it would not, for me, in my perspective, would not be the right move, as individuals would love to know exactly what is being reduced and why. They have mentioned also concerning their tax policy that they intend to introduce a tax holiday. which of course has two implications. Now, a tax holiday, for some of you know that when major investors come into the country, they are given a break and do not pay tax for a certain period of time. This removal of this tax holiday and then introducing, of course, tax credits instead has the potential to improve how much of our tax base is available to us, and could significantly increase government revenue and, of course, improve government expenditure projects as well. With an increase, of course, in government revenue through the removal of the tax holiday, we can also see a reduced need for borrowing and spending both locally and internationally. If the government is borrowing less, especially in the local economy, you will see that there is less crowding out taking place and an improvement in the business case. However, I will mention that this perhaps had a few weak points for me, because it did not clarify to a great extent what they intend to do with individual and corporate tax. And I believe that individual tax and corporate tax are the most important taxation policies, for the reasons being obvious that they are the most effective ways to get an economy either moving upwards or downwards, and as well represent the highest income for the government today. So that perhaps is one of their weakest points. Why has corporate tax or individual tax not been highlighted? And how do they intend to work around it? Whether an upward movement or a downward movement of these tax, or a combination of downward and upward movement in one sector or the other, so as to help us understand exactly what they intend to do. As concerning debt management, they intend to reduce local borrowing so as to reduce crowding out. As I've already mentioned, will improve business by so doing. If the government is borrowing less, then the companies are borrowing more, and thus more investment is taking place. But of course, another concern for me is that if they mention they intend to reduce borrowing, how do they intend to offset that reduction in borrowing? And they have not mentioned how they're going to improve liquidity should they reduce this borrowing. Now, of course, when you reduce borrowing locally, the other option is to borrow internationally, or to reduce spending, or to increase tax. It would have been nice for them to show us exactly what the plan is by reducing local borrowing and how they intend to offset that reduction that they intend to point out. Lastly, the PF also intend to improve agro processing by, of course, revamping dilapidated dip tanks and, of course, providing more in the field of agriculture. Now, of course, by upgrading and revamping agriculture, we expect to see an improvement in GDP, a reduced net price of almost all consumer goods, as most consumer goods do contain some form of agricultural product. So this means that it will positively influence our inflation rate by reducing it and perhaps taking it back to our target 6 to 12% threshold. And today, as we know, inflation is somewhere in the upper 20 percentage points. Overall, a strong economic policy that the manifesto of the PF has produced for us, with good protective policy, with good mining strategy, and of course a strong energy policy as well. My criticism will remain the same. They have not mentioned how they plan to extend the copper mining value chain so that we can see more improved movement in our copper processing, smelting, and refining. And this, I believe, should be a significant policy procedure for any government that intends to take office. We should be doing more with our copper rather than just simply digging it out and taking it for refining or processing elsewhere. So that is a major criticism of mine, that the value chain for the copper processing procedures has not been mentioned. The farmer input support program as well, again, is not mentioned. As I've mentioned before, this is a highly inefficient structure, as plenty of research has shown, and thus a lot of work needs to be done with regards to it. Overall, though, a very strong manifesto from both of these contenders that have been presented to the Zambian people. I do hope to see improvement in the farmer input support program and the copper value chain from whoever would take office. Otherwise, very strong manifestos, as I have mentioned. I hope you've liked the videos. I hope you've learned one or two things. Let us know what you think in the comments, and let's begin a conversation over our economic policy and move the economy together in the right direction. If you haven't already, please remember to like and subscribe and follow us on all our various channels. And let us know what topics you would like us to handle in the next coming series as well, so that we can begin a more effective conversation concerning our economic policy. We'll catch you on the next one.